the sanctuaries are doing it used to have
You can just switch. You want to just switch? Yay. Okay, go. Deep breaths. We're ready to go. All right. Maybe? Hello, hello. Hello. It's just blinking. Hello, hello. You're fine. Yeah. It's not one thing, it's another, technology. This is not. Hello, hello. I don't know if it's over there, but I'm just gonna talk. Yeah, I got nothing. Yeah, just gonna leave that there for now. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to ReefTalks. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your patience as we got set up with some new equipment today. Yeah, mahalo for being here. Mahalo to Kona Brew for hosting us in this location. This has been a wonderful place to gather and learn some more about different work going on in our communities. So my name is Alyssa Garvin. I am the Administration Education Director here at Malama Foundation. So I live on Oahu, but I was able to come join us this evening to be here and to help support this wonderful program. So thank you all for being here. So Malama Foundation, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, I see quite a few regulars in the room, so thanks for your continued support. But for those of you who might need an introduction to us, we were established in 1991 to do coastal marine conservation here in Hawaii. So we have 4 main programs. We have our day use mooring buoy program, which Victoria Martachi is the director of. So if you ever have any needs related to that program, her information is on our website. You can reach out directly to her. But that was how our organization started back in 1990. There was a group of concerned citizens who were going out to enjoy the reefs, diving, and having to throw anchor and seeing the damage that would cause on the reefs. They sprung into action. They started to come up with some solutions, and the day use mooring buoy network was born. And so now we have over 220 of those statewide. And if you are a boater yourself, they are public use, 2.5 hours, first come, first serve. And there's a map on our website if you're wondering where they are. That was historically all donor volunteer based. And we have started over the past about 2 years, been able to get money from the state to continue supporting this program in a more sustainable way. So we have maintenance going on, inspections regularly throughout the islands. Some of the islands that were not able to keep up with the volunteer sort of role over the years, we're looking to get them all cleaned up and standardized. And so it's been a huge effort, a huge initiative that we're making a lot of progress on. We also have our Ridge to Reef education program, and this one is near and dear to my heart as someone who pursued a degree in this because I was able to have immersive experiences in our natural environment. And so this program takes students here on Hawaii Island, mostly Kona and North Kahala, out on field trips to get their hands and feet dirty and wet and to really experience those place-based learning. And then we also bring in experts to the classroom to give presentations, and we have coordinators who really help out the teachers manage all of that. Because as you can imagine, as teachers during the day, when most of us are conservationists or maybe emailing back and forth to book those things, they're teaching. And so it's very hard for them to coordinate such a large effort. And many of those students don't get to have field trips like that unless they're in our program. So that is one of our education programs that's been going on here since about 2008. And we have the George A. Wilkins Scholarship. This is, we had our inaugural scholarships awarded last year. We're about to award some more at the end of this month. So we're really excited about that, sending kids here in Hawaii to school to then bring their knowledge, hopefully, back to our state to make a difference. And then we have ReefTalks, which you're all at. Welcome. This is our community lecture series where we bring in experts from around the community to share about their good work. Yeah, so this started about 20 years ago. It's been going on for a long time. We've had pauses in between different partnerships. Usually we try to do this on the third or fourth Thursday of the month. And lately we've been hosting here at the Thirsty Gecko by Kona Brew. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about us, can follow along, donate, go to our website, read all about it. But thank you for being here. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter. Welcome. This is Kelly. Yes, round of applause. I'm going to hand this to you before I keep going along. So Kelly is an associate research scientist at the Center for Global Discovery Conservation Science with ASU. And she is here today to talk about where sewage is leaking into our reefs. Yay! So exciting. Very important topic. So welcome, Kelly. Thank you for being here. So take it away.
All right, let's see if this works inside.
Yay.
All right, is that better? Too loud? All right. Well, thank you for Malama for the invitation and for Alyssa for that warm welcome. And thank you all for coming out here. Since this is a food establishment, hopefully I won't ruin any appetites by talking about sewage contamination, the topic du jour. But what I do hope to do over the next 30 minutes or so, if you're not already convinced, is to convince you what a serious problem wastewater pollution is in West Hawaii, especially for our reefs. As Alyssa mentioned, I come at this as a scientist. I work for Arizona State University. I'm based in Hilo. I live in Volcano. Mahalo for my parents for scooping out all the tephra from my gutters from the last eruption. So I am based here on this island. I come at this as a scientist interested in mapping and water quality issues, especially in the context of aquatic ecosystem restoration. When I put my science hat on, it is because it's so interesting to think about all of the spatial and temporal scales at which these processes are interacting and happening. There's sort of a lot of complex science to dig my teeth into as a scientist. But also water quality issues in terms of restoration and solving environmental problems are really like a limiting factor a lot of times when we think about restoration and fixing problems. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And that's especially true for reefs in West Hawaii. So a lot of the water quality work I do is sort of in a diagnostic sense to support a big reef restoration program in West Hawaii called A'Koa'koa. So that's the program that some of you are very deeply involved in or may know about or may have seen our signs at the places you go diving and swimming in West Hawaii. But the work I do is sort of in the context of this A'Koa'koa reef restoration program. And that's sort of twofold objectives. We know we need to fix water quality problems to support reef restoration. You know, that's a long process, a lot of management and planning, and we do want to fix these problems. But just as important, when we think about ecosystem restoration and helping the corals and the work we're doing for restoration that all the sort of coral specialists know about, is knowing where to focus our efforts and particularly where not to focus our efforts. Because there are limiting water quality conditions where restoration just isn't going to be as successful as it could be if we did it on the other side of the bay or down in the next bay, or maybe waited until a different season or until some conditions have cleared. So the water quality diagnostics here are really to support this large-scale coast-wide restoration program. And I was told by our communications person today, if there's any folks who have spare time between midnight and 2 a.m. And want to help volunteer watching the coral spawning for the lobata, we are looking for volunteers in the next few weeks. I can give you more information about that afterwards. But yeah, so the reef restoration program is what this work is in support of. And I'm not sure if you can tell with the lights here, but when we think about water quality problems and conditions that are facing our corals here in West Hawaii, this picture in the background here, many of you may sort of recognize where Kauai Harbor is here. But one of the problems is sort of this really visible, oh, I don't know which light he's gonna go for. Oh, there we go. Okay, so one of the categories of problems, I think is really well represented by this satellite picture here from, I think this is January 2024, one of the big storms in the wet season here. It produces these big sediment plumes that cause these very visible problems. We take a look on the ground. This is sort of a different storm, same issues, same place. So we have all this sort of brown water. And this is sort of one, if we think about water quality problems in coral for West Hawaii, I like to think of it sort of in these two categories. This is our really visible problem, sort of our brown water that we see that is sort of the episodic problems associated with storms and runoff. This is particularly a challenge up in North Kohala area where there is a lot of sediment to run off and sort of more rainfall and more well-developed soils. And especially in these areas where we have a lot of sort of invasive species, your goats and deer. Well, we don't have deer here, but the sort of pigs and goats that are stirring up all of the soil that eventually makes its way to our gulches and out into the water. And it's not just sort of that first pulse from the storm, but then every time there's swell, that sediment sort of gets resuspended and can cause problems again and again. Not to belabor the point, but in this, this is a little darker image here, but this is another satellite. This is such a satellite image where you can actually see this is going maybe 10, 20 kilometers out into the coast. We can see these sediment plumes from space sometimes. Again, they're episodic. It's a sort of a huge wallop right at once. And this is a problem for the corals. It's a problem for diving. It reduces your visibility. That's also a problem for the corals when the water column is cloudy, because the algae that live in them and produce their energy needs to be able to see the sunlight to grow, just like plants in your garden. So when there's reduced light visibility in the water column, the corals don't have as much energy from their algal symbionts. Just the volume of sediment also can be a problem. These corals can get smothered by sediment and have to work to sort of slough that material off their bodies so that it's not weighing them down. And then the nature of that material also, we're not just talking about sort of natural sediment particles from the soil, but this is also all the road debris that comes off in stormwater, the things that wear and tear from your car, the tire material that sloughs off. All that stormwater sort of runoff is sort of part of this load that is bringing metals and contaminants bound to those particles associated with the sediment. So we have a ton of problems associated with this kind of brown, visibly brown water and the sediment loads that are episodic. The other problem we have, so the other category is kind of an invisible problem, the wastewater problem that we're gonna talk about today. So even though this water is sort of beautifully blue, crystal clear looking where the reef is, it's not necessarily the healthiest environment for coral. this category of wastewater problems, it's invisible, sort of this chronic issue where the groundwater is bringing contamination on a continual basis into the reef. And if we took a look at that same place from a different perspective and put a sort of shaded the color here by estimates from a model of how much sort of effluent from every one of these red dots, which represents sort of a point source of wastewater contamination. We do sort of a mathematical estimate of how much of that load is making it through the ground into the ocean. This is sort of a representation of what that might look like. And so every one of these red points here is called like a septic or a sewer system. They call them on-site sewage disposal systems. It's sort of a technical term maybe some of you are familiar with. Could think of it sort of as like all these like flush points in the landscape where it's a point source of discharge right into the ground. In West Hawaii, we don't really have a lot of surface flow in streams that would sort of be bringing all of the rainwater, soaking into the ground and carrying all of that wastewater to the coast. And that's the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. I lost anyone yet? All right. So of all of the fats, so there's a lot of variability up and down the coast. And this figure here is not to sort of get into the weeds or details of, but I wanted to show you that there's been a ton of analysis with over 20 years of data looking at sort of that layer of wastewater effluent and the estimate of how much wastewater is making it to the reef among all of these other sources of variability: urban runoff, sediment input, rainfall, wave exposure. So of all of the main variables, all of the main variation up and down the coast, we can compare that over time and over space with how well the corals have been doing from the surveys that the Division of Aquatic Resources does. And this study by Jamie Gove and folks from NOAA, this is a big team effort, but they looked at sort of all of this data and compared how well the corals were doing before and after some of the big heat waves. And lo and behold, out of all of these sort of the factors that are varying along the coast and in the water, wastewater pollution is sort of the number one bad issue associated with reefs that are doing worse after heat waves. So we know there's a lot of variability, but out of a number of factors, wastewater pollution is sort of the main culprit for the reefs that are not going to do as well after the heat waves. So the main message we get from sort of the long-term picture is that we know there's going to be more heat waves. We know that this is going to be a continual issue. Water quality makes those problems worse for coral. So places where there's bad water quality, the corals are not going to be doing as well. They're going to not have as much resilience to be able to withstand those heat waves. And that's not really surprising. There's been decades of work done up in Puko. Folks from Hilo have been studying this problem for years, folks from Manoa. It's not a surprise. We know that all of the toxins and the sort of mixture of chemicals and pollution that are associated with wastewater, they cause growth anomalies, they cause disease, tissue mortality. They're really negative sort of physiological impacts for coral. Even so, there's materials in wastewater that corals just really don't know how to deal with, or at levels that they haven't had to experience before. So putting in energy into dealing with all of those problems is less energy that they can that they can devote to growth and reproduction and building a healthy reef. So that's not really surprising to know that. So we know that waste, we know sort of how, and we know why, and so we're pretty sure that we know a lot of the mechanisms behind why wastewater is such a problem. But when we want to put it to use sort of operationally for restoration, one of the big questions becomes where? Sort of where is this a problem? And that's where mapping comes in. So when I say that we want to know where this is a problem, sort of more specifically, we want to know which places where fresh water flows into the ocean are contaminated and which ones aren't. The process by which contamination reaches the coast is a natural process. There's freshwater springs. This is sort of a natural flow of water that is bringing sort of all the rainwater that percolates into the ground to the coast. The problem is when those particular flows get contaminated by all of the output from those little red dots on the landscape, the flush points that are leaking wastewater with various levels of treatment into the groundwater. And then that groundwater is moving faster to the coast than the microbes that are in the soil would naturally be able to clean it, because maybe our septic system designs are built for soils that are more than 500,000 years old. We don't have a lot of soil. There are a lot of sort of cracks in this volcanic soil. So there are design standards for our wastewater systems, but as you may know, they're sort of continually improving and evolving to deal with the conditions that we have here in West Hawaii. In terms of figuring out which one of those specific places, any place along the coast, whether it's contaminated or not, first I'll tell you about how we find those places in the first place, where those submarine groundwater discharge locations are, and I'll explain what that is, and then how we go about determining whether or not they're contaminated. So you may know from swimming or diving in the reef, that the places where fresh water emerges into the ocean tend to be kind of these colder patches. Yeah, I see a lot of folks nodding, yeah. So we use that to our advantage to be able to identify where those are systematically across the whole coastline. You probably know where those places are in the places that you visit a lot. So we use mapping technology to systematically find where they are over the entire coastline. So this is using our sort of laboratory in the sky, the Global Airborne Observatory. We put sort of a thermal sensor on that, and we can identify exactly where even these very tiny places of cold water are, and the very specific places where fresh water is entering the coast. This is down in South Kona, an example of what that looks like. Sort of these yellow stars represent the specific springs or places where the water is emerging, and there's sort of this cold plume where that fresh water is causing sort of that cold patch. So the contaminated sources, or the potentially contaminated sources, are all these sort of yellow stars. And when we map the whole coastline, there's over 1,000 individual point locations up and down the coast where there's these discrete freshwater outflows, the submarine groundwater discharge plumes. This is a visual representation of what sort of that raw data looks like. It's very complicated, and in the paper describes sort of all of the details on that. But basically we can see in sensor data where these cold plumes are and map very small differences in temperature to see where those are. And even when we go back to the same places and use can use drones and sort of look at it, look at the same place over time. They're pretty consistent. So the sort of coast-wide mapping we're pretty confident that that is representative of what the conditions are. And then, so there's over 1,000 sites up and down the coast, and we need to, it takes field sampling to figure out whether or not they're contaminated. And if there were sort of unlimited resources and time and money, of course, I'd have multiple years of observation from every single one of those 1,000 sampling sites, and they'd all be sort of logistically feasible to get to. But our study, we focused on almost 50 sites, and these are mostly concentrated in the North Kohala area up to Mahukona, and especially in South Kona, where there's sort of less data, down to Honaunau and Milili'i and Honolulu Beach, sort of filling out places where there's less certainty about what the conditions are, and also where there's potential to do restoration. So we collect water samples from those yellow stars, the site as close to the sort of source as possible, and analyze those water samples using the same methods that the Department of Health uses to look for fecal indicator bacteria. So this is the same thing if you ever see like a beach warning sign that there's been sort of a sewage leak, or something is tested positive above that beach action value, and they need to go back and test because it's above the level associated with public health issues, or when you might get gastrointestinal issues or rashes, things like that. We look for the same thing. Of course, put up a sign, tell people not to go in the water, but the corals are stuck there. They can't really avoid the issue when it's present. And also, if you think about the size of an individual coral polyp compared to the size of a human, the level that is safe for us to swim at or not safe for us to swim at, corals are way more sensitive to like these very small changes. So we sort of adapt the methods from DOH, but use the same essentially lab methods to test for these fecal indicator bacteria. It's not really the bacteria itself that's bad. It's an indication that like this is coming from wastewater. There's probably this chemical cocktail that's bad at this spot. And then where we get those hits for the fecal indicator bacteria, then we assume that that's sort of a potentially contaminated site, or we found evidence of contamination, that sort of chronic wastewater issue. And it varies on really small scales, like one side of a beach versus another could be totally different. There's a lot of variability in this data. But when we looked at it all across our sort of 50 sites that we sampled, 20 of them were contaminated. And we ran a statistical model to look for the factors associated with which sites were contaminated versus not. And what really emerged from the data is that there's a lot of variability, but there's two big factors that were important for predicting whether a site was contaminated or not. And that was the number of those red points, the on-site sewage disposal systems in the upstream watershed, and then also the amount of land development within 500 meters of the coast. And those were sort of the two most important factors that told us whether or not taking a sample at one of those individual locations, whether it was more likely or not to be contaminated. So I call that the danger zone here. So we were, with just those two factors, we would be able to make a pretty good guess about whether or not we're more likely or not to get a contaminated sample from where we were going.
Sorry,
Oh.
OSPS again?
Oh, sorry. Good to ask, because I hear there's a trivia event after this. That's on-site sewage disposal system. And it's this sort of umbrella catch-all term for septic systems and cesspools. Yeah.
What are you testing Enterococcus?
Yes.
How do you define contamination?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Enterococcus, yeah. So we used a threshold of 35 MPN, which is lower than DOH, but it's the level that DOH looks for the long-term mean of a site. Yeah. Hi.
I don't mean to interrupt your.
Wow.
I was just discussing this with Andy Sidney. Sometimes you have contamination without large people or Enterococcus counts. Mainly because it goes through, but when you have a septic system that goes into the ground, it goes through lava as filtered. So you're still getting nitrogen as
Yeah, this is very conservative for, yeah.
So you're not just using one indicator, that you're using multi-indicators of contamination.
For this study, we used one, and it would be great to add more. There's a couple of, so we also measured a bunch of, we measured like dissolved organic matter and turbidity and salinity in those water samples. But what we wanted to do, but for the statistical model, we wanted something where we could predict across the whole coast. If we didn't have any water samples and we had to just make a guess based on land cover data and mapping and information that we could get from every site, sort of to know where to focus our efforts. So it'd be great to build out more data and sort of improve that model and be able to use multi indicators. This is definitely a starting point. Does that answer your question? Oh, yes. Hi. Oh.
I'm just wondering if you can give us an idea on, we're on cesspool. I don't really know of any septic treatment going on in most of the neighborhoods. We're just in the neighborhood down on Malama Street, so we're in the corner. And we worry about it, but we keep kicking the can down the road. But what about, what's the percentage of like cesspool and versus septic?
That is a great question that I don't know the answer to off the top of my head.
Isn't the number one, at least in West Hawaiʻi, way of, it's cesspool, right?
Yes, yeah. So we did test, there were maybe, I think it was like 57 or 60 variables that we tested. Is it the number of specifically cesspools in this area, like within 1 kilometer, within the whole watershed? And the signal was slightly stronger for just all OSDS combined, potentially because the OSDS sort of point data is not all that perfect and great, especially sort of right at the coast and a lot of the places where there's sort of older infrastructure that's not well represented in those OSDS maps. So I think there's a little bit more improvement that needs to happen in that data and in that inventorying process. Or I guess it's not a process at all, actually. It's just sort of one data set, one static data set that exists. But the signal that we found that was the strongest was just the total number of OSDS. And I think if we have more data, we can sort of refine that. But I think it sort of intuitively we would think that cesspools would be way worse than septic, but it really is this sort of interaction with the geology that's there and what's actually happening once it reaches underground. And we don't have great maps of every fracture and every crack of what that groundwater transport system looks like for the whole coast. There's some detailed knowledge in some areas, but knowing exactly each spot is sort of a case-by-case situation. And Steve Colbert and folks from Hilo have been doing great work with dye tracer tests to sort of test individual sites and see what is and isn't connected to the coast. But it's a real challenge to scale that up to the whole coast. So sort of have this trade-off of knowing a lot of detail about some sites, but then being able to transfer that knowledge to somewhere where we don't have any data is a challenge. So I think I strayed from your original question, but I have a couple more slides, but I'm happy to interact, and I think we will have some time for general discussion too. So these predictions that we made based on our statistical model, these are on our Akoakoa mapping platform, along with where all those SGD plumes are. But we have predictions. This is sort of a statistical model that comes with a lot of uncertainty, but we, based on the statistical model, we have sort of a general idea of where to focus our efforts and which places are more or less likely to be contaminated. And it's really these areas with high levels of nearshore, both nearshore development and a lot of upstream wastewater point sources, which maybe you wouldn't be surprised to guess, but that's what our data showed are the places that are most susceptible to contamination. And quantitatively, or if we look at sort of all 1,000 or so sites up and down the coast, just based on the numbers, more than half of them the model predicts to be contaminated. We definitely need more data to refine sort of our estimates in the sort of central part of the watershed, where we're sort of above those thresholds of how many OSDS there are, how many wastewater sources there are upstream anyway. But that's sort of why we focused our efforts in South Kona and the northern part of the coast, because those are where there's sort of better chances of our restoration efforts being successful at this point, until wastewater issues until we can make some progress on more wastewater cleanup and mitigation. Not to say we're not doing anything in this area, but we know it's going to be challenging. And the website where all these maps are is maps.akoakoa.org, or the sort of link from the top of the Akoakoa website. And yeah, that is all I have for the slides. But I just want to say mahalo for everyone who supported all of these efforts and the study that went into it, and especially the cultural advisors for the Akoakoa program. And I'm happy to take any questions, and yeah. I think we're good on time. All right, we do our questions or trivia questions first. So we got some eager questions. All right, in the back, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the heat, the corals are going to have hard time recovering because of this contamination.
Mm-hmm.
Are the corals being negatively impacted because of contamination? And secondly, is there algal growth that's in competition because of the higher contamination, because of higher nitrogen? Is there more algal growth in competition with the benthic system for new corals to settle on? Are you seeing more algal, the rhinophytes, ones that are associated with this contamination? Are you seeing those in the sites proliferating also?
So the second part of your question about what is happening at the sites, I will have to ask our divers and the folks doing the sort of coral reattachment, but you're exactly right that the problem that corals are also facing from the wastewater. It's not just these the sort of chemical problems and the disease and the tissue growth, but the nutrients that are associated with that wastewater are stimulating algae that compete for space. So just like weeds in your garden, if you fertilize, then the really sort of fast-growing weedy species are the ones that are going to take over first. That's the same thing underwater. It's a big competition for space, and the algae can really gobble up those nutrients a lot faster than the coral. There's some places where there's like edge cases where like it's not. There's places you'll find where that's not the case. I'm particularly thinking about sort of on the Hilo side. There's sort of a real nutrient-rich site where there's great coral in sort of Pui Bay, right outside the breakwater there. So there are anomalies, but yeah, that sort of competition, typical kind of eutrophication idea, that process is exactly the problem. So there's the chemicals, the nutrients, the bacteria, sort of a whole mixture of everything.
This is a concept that's important for 20 years I've been here.
Yeah.
The phase shift. The phase shift that the Florida Keys suffered 25, 30 years ago. And we don't want to say phase shift over here from moving to a coral to an algal system, but is it becoming more algal dominant out there because of this contamination?
I would say there's a lot of variability up and down the coast. There's a lot of places that are doing really well. And especially that study, the 20-year study, there were almost as many places that were sort of had a positive trajectory as a negative trajectory. South Kona, like we found a lot of places where there was contamination, but there's still a lot of great like seed bank basically, or like there's a lot of good nursery grounds where there's still a lot of hope, and there's a lot of sort of genetic stock there that can support really resilient reefs. So I think there's a lot of places that are hard hit, but there's also a lot of places where there's a lot of success. So there's so much variability up and down the coast. It really depends where you are. So yeah, that's yeah. Oh, sorry, we had two questions.
Oh, what can we do as a person, as a family? I mean, almost everybody here has a septic system of some sort. And we have yeah, we've got septic because we're up on the hill. But, it's just, what can we do? Can we put something out in the yard, throw our coffee grounds up in the grass, or let it trickle down somehow, or?
Yeah, I think it's really the small scale, like getting engaged is really great. I think what is more impactful and useful is making your voice heard when there's new bills for land use zoning and sort of housing development, what those setbacks should be, what the standards are for new development going in, what the standards for those wastewater systems are. Because there's so much new development happening that we know there's this legacy cesspool problem to deal with, and there's some progress being made with the green fee. To be built, but even septic has challenges in volcanic soil.
Whatever you take in your body passes in your waste and into your own septic system.
Yeah. I guess on an individual level, just getting your septic tank inspected, like a yearly inspection, and like cleaning it out to know whether it's in proper working order is like one place to start. I'll make another plug for the coral spawning also, because the sort of water quality mitigation is also in concert with the active restoration. We can't all stay up till 2 a.m. waiting for coral to spawn, but the supporting what's going on at the coral nursery is also sort of a great way. And I think talking about it, just it's a testament for everyone that came out tonight. There's a Hilo Bay restoration sort of management plan in the works too, and I'm so surprised when there's folks that sort of come up and don't and think that the wastewater issue is solved or don't think it's a big problem, especially compared to other things that are going on. But yeah, just talking about it in general, I think, even though it's a little taboo topic. And maybe Auntie Cindy has some great ideas also about what to do.
No, I wanted to ask you a question because you had brought you had mentioned the new water quality testing and your caucus and Hawaiʻi is also we're also working together with them on these collecting that data. Do you collect that data separately for ASU?
So we did, this was sort of like a one-time effort or like a big campaign. We don't have an ongoing monitoring because we're sort of doing like spot checking before restoration or sort of doing things we don't have the sort of resources and capacity, at least at this point, to have an ongoing long-term monitoring. Especially for the same objectives that Hawaii Viola is doing. It's great that those data are being collected, and like Department of Health just doesn't have the resources to really monitor the way that they should be. But it's also important to remember, or an important thing that we had to consider is that the objectives of we've talked about this before, but the Department of Health is concerned about swimmability and public health for humans. So they're sampling where we go swimming and is it safe where people are in the water. Our study had, we were sampling because we wanted to know sort of exactly at these freshwater springs, is this where contamination is entering the reef? And if there's a level of contamination entering that is maybe sort of less of a concern for humans, but maybe indicates that there's a problem upstream, that maybe sort of a low level problem that corals would be sensitive to, that maybe wouldn't make you sick, then that's sort of a different purpose for the different sampling. So we made sure to sort of sample in exactly the specific places that our maps told us this is where the submarine groundwater discharge was coming from. But yeah, it's not necessarily an ongoing thing, but it would be great to supplement and add to our data sets. Yeah. Oh, I'll circle back to folks that have asked questions already.
I just quick question following up on what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Were there any takeaways with regard to human health and water activities from this work? Like, for instance, stay away from this site after a heavy rain, scuba diving, or free diving.
Yeah, I would say take a look at our maps on the website, and if you see a bunch of houses right nearby, pay attention to the EPA or the Department of Health notifications when there is warnings. But really those cold water sort of discharge sites, those are the places to look out for.
But are those actually approaching levels are they approaching levels that would be harmful?
It depends on the specific site, but yeah, so like you said, especially after heavy rain, when it's low tide, that means there's sort of a larger gradient from upstream to downstream, so the water's sort of flowing more downstream. But yeah, we found certainly a lot of variability Yeah, we could sort of go piece by piece through the coast. But, we had 2 more questions over here. Yeah.
Are you aware of any testing for organic chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, and a new class of forever chemicals, PFAs, that have impact on coral reefs?
Yeah, so we've done a little bit of testing for pesticides and for pharmaceuticals in very select specific locations, looking for those low-level organic contaminants. I'm not sure there's any forever chemical data for Hawaii Island at all. There was a bunch of testing that USGS did in like the 80s, mostly over on the Hilo side where the sort of volcanic plants were for pesticides and looking for that. There's from scouring what I've been able to find, there's sort of very spotty one-time data that's really hard to compare to anything because it was sort of a one-off study done in the 80s or sort of a one-time thing that is really hard to put into any context. That being said, there are a lot of chemicals that are in the state water quality regulations that are sort of levels in fish and water quality. We have a ton of thresholds for what is safe, and no testing, no data is being collected to know what the conditions of our water is. Department of Health just doesn't have the resources for it. So that's there's yeah, at the state level, the Department of Health doesn't. They're in the process of coming up with plans for implementing inland water monitoring, but to get funding to sort of meet state conditions for the Clean Water Act, we're supposed to monitor and assess a certain percentage of waters in the state, and we sort of do the best we can. Yeah. So there's a lot more, there's a surprising lack of water quality data on this island, for sure. Yes. Hi.
I've got a series of questions. But,
okay. I want to make sure we have time for trivia too, so I'll make sure Alyssa cuts us off when we need to. Yeah, but.
So we have a situation on this island where we have contamination from cesspools and that sort of thing, but we also have contamination coming from watersheds, and development within watersheds. So you have the brown water problems around watersheds and that sort of thing. You mentioned in your discussion that you were, because of your sampling, you decided that the south and the north are probably the best ways to go for coral restoration. But didn't Koala have, especially during this last set of storms, a lot of pollution go in through the watersheds from the development in that area and the watersheds themselves? Is that correct? Not right?
Yes, and that's exactly where I think the first map I showed was, yeah, the sort of that Pelicani Bay area, and
so
yeah.
Considering concentrating your coral restoration in both the south and the north.
So the northern sites, I guess I was talking about, was more like Mahukona, and places where there's not so much development, like way up north. Yeah, and even, I guess I didn't want to give the wrong impression there that there's sort of places that are off limits or not, but it's even sort of being able to sort of map at a fine enough spatial level of detail. We know if there's really important places where, just based on the sort of ocean currents, that they're kind of like upstream nursery areas that sort of support a lot of area, just based on like where corals are naturally spawning, the sort of nursery grounds. we know there's really important places that there's challenging water conditions to deal with. But because we have a sort of fine scale mapping capability, we can say, well, we should focus sort of on this side instead of over here, this sort of meter scale. Like we're gonna, if we're trying to do it here, where is gonna give us the best chance of success? Or we can see exactly where all that sediment kind of landed and know, okay, well, we got to do a lot of sort of reattachments in this area that got hit hard by the storm because there's sort of big reproductive sized corals there. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, there's sort of different scales that we think about the challenges. We know sort of broad scale, different, the different sort of geologic ages of the lava flows and the lands vary up and down the coast in a way that we sort of know general patterns. And then if you focus into a bay, there's sort of another level of detail that comes into play. And then if we're looking sort of at a meter scale, we can think about things that would vary on that scale as well. So it's a complicated process that science nerds like me like to think about, but yeah, putting it into practice, there's a lot of things that's all layered onto sort of logistical constraints and what the community is ready for, what the resources are. So yeah, a lot of things to think about.
One other question. You concentrated your analysis on Enterococcus coliform. Those are indicators of human pollution. However, like I said, we have areas where there is filtration of bacterial forms, and you still have nitrogen in high concentrations. Why are you concentrating on bacteria and not on nitrogen?
So this was something that we used wanted to use the methods that the Department of Health uses and sort of be able to sort of feed into and inform, sort of like leverage the thresholds that they've come up with. But you're exactly right that we should be also using nitrogen. The method for doing the bacteria testing is sort of a little, there's sort of a more rapid way to do it. So it's just sort of a time and resource issue that would be great to have as many indicators as we can.
So in your decision making for restoration sites, are you looking at your actual transect data, coral cover, coral health, species diversity, or do you have actual spectral analysis also from your flying laboratory, looking at areas of bleaching, patchiness, sea surface temperatures, and also correlating with this Enterococcus or point source human pollutants?
Yes, yeah, there's a lot more that goes into all of those analysis, and I'm just one person in the engine room on a big diagnostics team, and I think one of the most important things is actually that spectral data that show us the live coral maps before and after different events, and looking at how that's looking at the live coral maps, which are also on the Akokoa map portal. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into that decision-making process.
Can we use your Akokoa graphs to pull down and share with decision makers?
Yes, yeah, everything that's on the web platform, I think there's a download link. And please reach out if you have trouble with it. We're updating it all of the time to try to make it. There's a lot of different levels of technical expertise for folks that are using that. We're always improving it, trying to make it a little more intuitive to use, because I have trouble with it sometimes too. But yes, they should all those layers should have download links. Yes.
I just was thinking too. Has this study been does our Governor Josh Green know about this study, and has anybody talked to him?
Yes.
That's number, okay. And then the other thing is, you know, with development and so forth, we have these, along our coast, most of our mega resorts are pretty old. So I'm just wondering, are there laws in place now, if they're gonna, to try to get them to do more treatment before everything just goes into the ocean?
I would have to look into that before, I don't want to speak out of turn and say something that's not true. So we rely on the state's sort of OSDS layer and what the sort of specific treatment levels are. And that's what those model data are based on also, is sort of occupancy and what the standards are. So there's a lot of sort of technical guesswork, very educated guesses that go into making these sort of modeled estimates, and that's why we need the field data to go check. But in terms of if there's anything being proposed for the mega resorts, I'm really not sure. Maybe, I don't know if anyone in the audience knows if there's anything coming up in the next session or anything in the works.
The Hawaiʻi development, they have their own sewage treatment plants.
That's good.
For packaging, so they probably treat for effluent.
Want to do the treatment?
That's a fairly new.
Right, over.
Yeah.
They have a low pressure sewage system.
Uh-huh.
Brines
Well,
that they use, and they have their own maintenance wastewater treatment plant. But they're very close, right? It's not available to community. So we're looking at creating a closed circuit system for community.
Right. That's what I worry about, because, you know, in our neighborhood, it's just going into a hole in the ground, you know, and very primitive. And, you know, I mean, we do composting, so we try and, you know, take our food waste and everything and, you know, compost. But there's not a lot we can do, and they keep kicking the can down the road because, you know, in the 30 years we've been here, there's no progress.
yeah, the group that's made perhaps, or a lot, but I don't want to say it's the most, but a group that's doing a lot of work in this area is a group called Wastewater. It's wastewater. I can't remember exactly.
Wastewater innovations.
Yes, yeah.
Cleanwater.org.
Yeah, yeah. So there's there are sort of those community scale, above ground. There's all sorts of different kinds of innovations going into what can be done, even to reuse the wastewater, especially in areas where there's fire risk. We can sort of turn that into a resource. So there is a lot of work being done in that area, and I can get you the website, or someone at your table might know better than I what the latest with Stuart Coleman and his group. But there's a lot of workforce development going on. It's sort of concentrated on Oahu, but there's work being done on this island also, and they have a lot of resources. I think they'll probably be helping folks try to leverage the new green fee fund that will come. That was just passed a couple weeks ago, but all right. So yeah, it's still a drop in the bucket in terms of what we need, but there are definitely groups that are trying to work on building capacity in that area, because there's so much need compared to what the problem is. Yeah.
Okay, so along those lines, it would be super interesting to have some kind of model that would say, let's say we have some kind of incentive program for cesspool replacement that replaces X% of cesspools. We could then expect Y percentage increase in coral coverage on these sites. Is that something your work is ultimately driving towards?
I think it could. We try to sort of leverage between the different spread the resources more towards doing the sort of work on the ground than the modeling to say this is what could happen. But it's definitely a sort of iterative balance there. Yeah. There's a lot of folks on our team in the Aquaco program, but I think we really work with the cultural advisors for the specific places where we're working to like Auntie Sydney, to try to figure out what is going to sort of turn the momentum for any given site. Is it like a % increase in coral cover? Is it like what does the community want to see there? There are things going on in sort of the county and state legislature levels, but our focus is sort of prioritizing what's really gonna drive the vision for the specific communities that we're working in. So I would hesitate to say that sort of a top-down, big scale model is what's gonna drive things. But
Using your citizen scientists, train them so that they can support the day-to-day activities. Create a baseline. ReefTalks will do that for you. If you're in an area just talking to grad bios, it's what they do. So they will create a baseline by doing surveys, and then if we're working on the Malama to convert. Right now, we're working on the Malama to convert out of the cesspools along a big drive to a closed circuit system. Then because you have a baseline in the bay, once that occurs, then you can go back and do a survey and see what the difference is. And that's really critical, I think. Then you create a model that you can move to other bays around the state. That's what we're looking to do at Hawaiʻi.
Yeah, and the sort of fancy thermal mapping technology that I showed, like we sort of operationally deployed that across the coastline. But really, this is the information that people like Auntie Sydney and Auntie Gina Hona now. This is what they know. What if you've been going to these places or it's where you grew up. This is sort of common knowledge about where all these springs are. So the way that we're approaching sort of the modeling efforts and collecting our data is really putting sort of a common framework or some more technical language to sort of show what the communities know already and try to make it sort of comparable across sites. And it's not going to really be like a magic bullet that, oh, now we know where the springs are. Like, yeah, there's folks that have sort of they know where that is, but now we can apply the same model to all of those places and tell the story in a sort of a way that appeals to the government or the county council or places. We can translate that technical language that is the information that that people on the ground know by heart. Who wants some trivia questions? You can see who's been paying attention.